On January 15th, 2026, the leader of the German government stood up and did something politicians are almost never willing to do. He admitted he was wrong. For 20 years, Germany ran a terrifying experiment on its own economy. They called it the Energiewende, the energy turn. The goal was beautiful, ambitious, and as we know now, physically impossible. The plan was to shut down every single nuclear plant in the country, to turn off the coal, and to blanket the nation in solar panels and wind turbines. They wanted to prove to the world that a G7 industrial power, the country that makes Mercedes, BMW, and Siemens, could run an entire modern economy on the weather alone. They spent 500 billion euros, that is $500 billion. They rewired an entire continent. And last month, they looked at the results. The result is not a green utopia. It is an industrial graveyard. Factories in Ruhr Valley, giants like BASF and ThyssenKrupp are closing their foundational plants. Why? Because electricity prices in Germany are now the highest in the developed world. Chancellor Merz didn't just call this hiccup. He didn't blame it on the war in Ukraine. He looked at the data and he called the nuclear phase-out a strategic failure. This moment, right now, is the vindication. It is the end of the renewables-only fantasy. Germany has proven with their own checkbook that a modern economy cannot function on intermittent volts. But here's the twist. While Germany was failing, the smart money was quietly doing the math. Microsoft, Amazon, and Google aren't buying nuclear power because they want to save the polar bears. They're buying it because they have discovered a flaw in the power grid that batteries cannot fix. They're buying it because in the age of AI, baseload is the new oil. Welcome to Growth. I'm Sean, your guide to money and navigating the frontier of innovation. Today, we are going to dismantle the energy narrative you have been fed for the last decade. We are not going to talk about politics or ideology. We are going to talk about physics. First, we will break down the inverter problem. I'll explain why removing heavy spinning machines from the grid destabilizes the entire system, and why solar panels physically cannot do the job of the steam turbine. Next, we'll look at the global weather crisis. We will look at why average weather no longer exists and why batteries are mathematically incapable of saving us during extreme weather events. Then, we will go inside the AI data center. We will analyze the death of RE100 accounting and why Microsoft and Amazon are suddenly rushing to buy 24/7 nuclear power. And finally, we will look at the solution, DSMR. We will explain how the nuclear industry is moving from cathedrals to factories, and how to position yourself for this inevitable repricing event. To understand why the green dream broke, we need to change how we measure success. For the last decade, we have been obsessed with a metric called LCOE, levelized cost of energy. This metric asks, how much does it cost to generate 1 megawatt hour of electricity? By this measure, solar is cheap. It's almost free. But this metric is a lie, because it treats all electricity as the same. It assumes that a megawatt at high noon on a sunny day is worth the same as a megawatt at 2 a.m. on a windless night. It isn't. The grid is not a storage tank. You don't pour electrons in and take them out later. The grid is a balance beam. It is a real-time performance. The grid has a heartbeat. In the US, it beats 60 times a second, 60 Hertz. In Europe, it's 50 Hertz. Keeping that heartbeat steady is the single hardest job in engineering. And this is where we have to talk about the villain of our story, inverter. In a traditional power plant, nuclear, coal, or hydro, you generate electricity with a machine called a synchronous generator. This is a massive electromagnet. It weighs 200 tons. It spins at 3000 RPM. Because it is so heavy and because it is spinning so fast, it has inertia. Think of it like a freight train moving at full speed. If a bug hits the windshield or if a power line snaps, the train doesn't stop. It plows through. That heavy spinning metal physically fights any change in the grid. It stabilizes the heartbeat. Now look at solar. A solar panel does not spin. It sits there. It creates DC, direct current electricity. But the grid runs on AC, alternating current. So to get that power onto the grid, you have to pass it through a digital translator called an inverter. The inverter is just a computer. It looks at the grid's heartbeat and tries to copy it perfectly. It is grid following. But here's the problem. It has zero inertia. It has no weight. If the grid takes a hit, the inverter doesn't fight back. It just shuts off to protect itself. So, imagine a grid that is 100% solar and wind. You have removed all the heavy freight trains and replaced them with digital simulations. It's like trying to drive a semi-truck using a bicycle chain. It works fine on a downhill slope. But the moment you hit a hill, a demand spike, or a cloud passing over, the chain snaps, the frequency drops, the lights go out. This is what Germany discovered. You can have all the solar plants in the world, but if you don't have the inertia to stabilize them, you don't have a grid. You just have a very fancy science experiment. But what about batteries? Can't we just store the solar power for later? This is the second lie you have been told. Batteries, especially lithium-ion batteries, are amazing technology. I love them. But batteries are designed to solve problems of minutes, not weeks. We need to talk about the global weather crisis. We are building our entire energy system on the assumption that the weather is average. But the weather is becoming extreme. And in energy terms, extreme doesn't just mean a hurricane. It means stillness. There is a planetary phenomenon happening where massive high-pressure systems park over entire continents. The wind stops, the clouds roll in, and they stay there. This isn't a glitch. It's a feature of our new climate reality. Let's look at cases. In Germany, they call this Dunkelflaute, the dark doldrums. It happens every winter. For 2 weeks in January, solar output drops to near zero. Wind output drops to near zero. It's a renewable drought. Now look at the states. We have a polar vortex. When the Arctic air snaps down into Chicago, the wind turbines ice over. The sun is blocked by massive storm fronts. And crucially, this happens exactly when we need heat the most. If your entire grid is built on the weather, what do you do when the weather turns against you? You need storage, massive storage. But let's look at the hard reality. To back up the US grid for just 1 week of polar vortex using batteries, you'd need to buy every single battery produced on Earth for the next 10 years. The cost would be in the trillions. The physics of chemical storage simply do not scale to the season. So what happens when the Dunkelflaute hits Germany? Do they turn on the batteries? No, they are empty. They turn on the coal plants. They burn lignite, the dirtiest fuel on Earth, just to keep the lights on. This is the irony. The greenest grid in Europe is actually keeping the coal industry alive. Because thermodynamics does not negotiate with ideology. While governments were playing politics with the grid, the tech giants were playing a different game. For the last decade, big tech operated under a framework called RE100. It was a brilliant accounting trick. Google or Microsoft would say, "We are 100% renewable." Here's how it worked. They would build a massive data center in Virginia. That data center ran on a local grid, which is mostly coal and gas, 24 hours a day. Then, to offset the guilt, they would pay a solar farm in Arizona to generate some power at noon. They matched the numbers on spreadsheet at the end of the year and called it net zero. That worked for PR. It does not work for AI. An AI data center is a beast we have never seen before. It draws 500 megawatts, and it draws it as a flat line. It doesn't sleep. It doesn't throttle down at night. If you're training GPT-6 and your power flickers for 50 milliseconds, you don't just lose the lights. You crash the training run. You corrupt the checkpoint. You lose millions of dollars in compute time. Latency is an existential risk for AI. Satya Nadella and Sam Altman realized that virtual green isn't good enough. They need 24/7 carbon-free energy. They need power that is clean, but also physically guaranteed. This is why the checkbooks are opening. Microsoft signed a 20-year deal to start 3 Mile Island. Think about the symbolism. The site of the worst nuclear accident in US history is being resurrected by one of the most valuable companies in the world. Amazon bought a nuclear campus from Talon Energy to plug directly into the reactor. Google ordered a fleet of SMRs from Kairos. They're admitting that the only way to power the intelligence age is to split the atom. Now, let's zoom out. This isn't just about data centers. It's about national survival. We're witnessing a global scramble for the atom, and the chessboard is divided into 2 blocks. First, look at the Eastern Bloc. While the West was shutting down the nuclear plants, Russia and China were doubling down. Russia effectively controls the global fuel cycle. They own nearly 40% of the world's enrichment capacity. If you want to buy enriched uranium today, chances are you're sending a check to Moscow. China took a different route. They focused on heavy industry. To build a nuclear reactor, you need a massive steel vessel. It has to be forged in a single piece by a press that exerts 15,000 tons of pressure. China controls the vast majority of these heavy forgings. Their strategy is simple: dominate the supply chain, control the steel, control the fuel, and you control the energy future. Then you have the Middle East. Look at the UAE, a country floating on oil. They just turned on the Baraka nuclear plant, 5.6 gigawatts of power. Why? Opportunity cost. Every barrel of oil they burn to generate electricity is a barrel they cannot sell to China. Burning oil for power is like burning a Louis Vuitton bag to heat your house. It's bad business. Their strategy is burn the atom, sell the oil. It allows them to maximize their export revenue while running their desalination plants on cheap nuclear power. Finally, the West is waking up. We're realizing that we cannot build a clean energy future if the keys are held by our geopolitical rivals. This is triggering a massive wave of reshoring. The US government is pouring billions into companies like Centrus Energy to rebuild our ability to enrich uranium at home. We're seeing bans on Russian uranium imports. This is no longer just an energy story. It is a story about national security. So, if the demand is there, why haven't we built more plants? To answer that, we have to look at how a nuclear plant actually works. Most people don't know this, but a nuclear reactor is basically just a really fancy tea kettle. In a traditional light water reactor, the kind we built in the 70s. You used uranium to boil the water. That water turns into steam. The steam turns a turbine. The turbine makes electricity. It's simple, but it's inherently unstable. Because the reactor core is so incredibly hot, you have to force water through it constantly to keep it cool. You need active pumps, massive, high-pressure pumps that run 24/7. If the pumps stop, like they did at Fukushima, the flow stops. The water boils away. The fuel melts. You have a disaster. Because of this active risk, we have to build massive safety systems. Backup pumps, diesel generators, concrete domes thick enough to stop a plane crash. We turned power plants into cathedrals. They're huge, custom-built, and expensive civil engineering project. Now look at the SMR, Small Modular Reactor. This isn't just smaller reactor. It's different kind of physics. SMRs, like NuScale, use natural circulation. They don't need giant pumps. They rely on the simple fact that high water rises and cold water sinks. The water flows through the core naturally, powered by heat itself. If the power goes out, the physics don't stop. The water keeps circulating. The reactor cools itself down automatically. You don't need the pumps. You don't need the backup generators. You don't need the 10-mile evacuation zone. And because the safety is built into the physics, we can change how we build them. We stop building cathedrals. We start building products. This allows us to use the 138 rule of industrial manufacturing. A task that takes an hour to complete in a factory takes 3 hours in a staging yard and 8 hours on a muddy construction site. By moving the work into a factory, you structurally cut the labor cost by 80%. This is how you get Wright's law to kick in. Just like solar panels dropped 90% in price because we made billions of them, SMRs will drop in price because we will stamp them out like Toyotas. And there's one more thing, heat. Look at Dow Chemical. They're putting X-energy reactors directly inside their factories in Texas. Why? Because they don't just need electricity. They need high-pressure steam to make plastic. Most people don't realize this. Half the world's energy isn't electricity. It's processed heat. It's the fire we burn to melt steel, to crack chemicals, to make fertilizer. Solar panels cannot make steam. Nuclear can. This is the holy grail, industrial cogeneration, using the atom to decarbonize the hard stuff, steel, cement, and chemicals. This doubles the total addressable market for nuclear. So, how do we trade this? Most investors are still treating nuclear like a utility trade. Slow, boring, dividend stocks. They are wrong. This is a structural repricing of the entire energy stack. We are seeing the emergence of 3 new asset classes. First, look at the choke point. For decades, uranium was a buyer's market. We had too much supply. That era is over. Now, we have a bifurcation. The West is refusing to buy Russian fuel, but we haven't built the enrichment capacity to replace it. This creates a massive squeeze for the Western enrichment monopoly. The companies that hold the licenses to spin the centrifuge are not just selling fuel, they are selling national security. They are the only bridge across the chasm. Second, look at the moat, the infrastructure. In a world where it takes 10 years to build a new power plant, the plants that already exist are the most valuable assets on Earth. Think about it. If you own a nuclear plant today, you don't sell electricity to the grid for 5 cents. You sell reliability to a data center for 10 cents. We are seeing the data center premium get priced into these stocks. Old school utilities are morphing into tech infrastructure. They are no longer priced on how much power they sell, but on how much latency they prevent. And finally, the venture, the factory builders. This is the high-risk, high-reward layer. These are the companies trying to prove the 138 rule. They're trying to do for nuclear what SpaceX did for rockets: standardize and scale. Most of these companies will fail. It is a brutal hardware game with massive regulatory hurdles. But the one that succeeds, the one that delivers the first fleet of factory-built reactors, will be the Boeing of the atomic age. They will own the intellectual property of the 21st century grid. Germany proved that you cannot fight physics with subsidies. The 500 billion euro mistake is over. The world is moving from an era of virtual green accounting to an era of thermodynamic reality. We are entering a world where energy is no longer a commodity. It is a weapon. It is the limiting factor for AI, for industry, and for national security. The companies and countries that master the atom, that can build a factory, secure the fuel, and power the grid, will dictate the next 50 years of the global economy. The atomic age isn't coming. It's already here. I want to hear your take. Is the SMR timeline real, or will regulation kill it again? Let me know in the comments below. This was Sean from BySpark. If you enjoyed the video, press like, subscribe, and don't forget the notification. And if you want a written version of this video with full references, subscribe to our newsletter. Thank you for watching. Until next time.